My name is Lee Jiho. I am 26 years old. I have a degree in accounting and I read too many novels. That last part is probably the most relevant right now, because when I opened my eyes to a stone ceiling and cold air and the distant sound of horses somewhere outside, I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not even sit up particularly fast. I just lay there, staring at the gray ceiling above me, and said very quietly into the silence, "Oh no." The memories came in like water filling a bowl. Slow at first, then all at once. I was inside a novel. Not just any novel. I was inside Crown of the Fallen Star, a boys' love novel that I had purchased on a whim 6 months ago and finished reading exactly 1 week before I apparently tripped down my apartment staircase, hit my head on the landing, and woke up here. It was the kind of novel that had a stunning cover and a slow burn that made readers throw their phones across the room in frustration, in the best way. I had loved it. I had recommended it to 3 people. I had absolutely not expected to end up inside it. The worst part, and I say this as someone who had just been transmigrated into a fictional universe, was who I had woken up as. Not the male lead, not the love interest, not even the rival character with interesting backstory potential. I was the butler. Butleren. A character so minor that the author had not even given him a family name. He appeared in chapter 2 of the novel, handed the male lead a cup of tea, received a curt nod in return, and was never mentioned again. 4 lines of dialogue across the entire 300-page book. 4. I had more opinions about this novel's side characters than the author apparently had about Ren's continued existence. I sat up slowly on the thin cot that came with my position, because of course a background butler slept on a thin cot, and took in the room. Stone walls. 1 small window with gray morning light coming through it. A candle burned almost to nothing on the small table beside the bed. A folded uniform at the foot of the mattress, dark and neat. And outside, rising above the line of the window frame, the towers of Dawnhart Estate. I pressed both hands flat on my knees and made myself breathe. Okay. I needed to think clearly. Panicking was not going to help. I had read enough transmigration stories to know the basic shape of my situation, which was honestly either a comfort or a problem depending on how I chose to look at it. I knew this world. I knew this story. That was more information than most people in my position would have, and I was going to use it. The plot of Crown of the Fallen Star was straightforward, as BL novels went. Lord Caius Dawnhart was the male lead, cold, controlled, and carrying about 14 years of emotional suppression behind those silver eyes. He was the kind of character that readers loved because he was genuinely compelling and also deeply in need of someone patient enough to wait him out. That someone was Elliot Vorn, the second son of a duke, who arrived at the estate in Chapter 3 with a bright personality and an apparently inexhaustible supply of cheerful determination. Elliot chased. Caius resisted. Then Caius stopped resisting. Then everyone cried happy tears. Classic. My role in the story was to hand Caius tea in Chapter 2. Then I was supposed to cease to exist, narratively speaking. The safest, most sensible, most responsible thing I could do was exactly that. Play the role, stay invisible, let Caius and Elliot have their story, and hope that at some point I either woke up back in my real life or at least found a comfortable corner of this fictional world to live in quietly. It was a very good plan. I managed to hold it together for exactly 11 minutes. I had pulled on the butler's uniform, and credit where it was due, it fit well, dark fabric and clean lines, and was standing at the small mirror checking my collar when the door to my room opened without a knock. Not a gentle open, not a careful one. The kind of open that belonged to someone who did not typically think about whether the person on the other side was ready. I turned, fully prepared to bow to whoever it was, and stopped. Lord Caius Dawnhart was standing in my doorway. He was exactly as the novel described him and also somehow more. The author had done a good job, I thought distantly. The dark hair, the silver eyes, the particular quality of stillness that made him look like a man who had never made an accidental movement in his life. He was wearing his formal coat, but it was half undone at the collar in a way that suggested he had dressed quickly, or had been working since before the sun came up. He was looking at me with an expression I could not immediately categorize, which was unsettling because I had read every word written about this man and I should have been able to categorize it. I bowed. My lord, I only arrived last night. I haven't had the chance to fully acquaint myself with the household yet, but I will of course. I know, he said. His voice was exactly as low and precise as the novel had described. He looked at me, just looked, for a moment that stretched about 3 seconds longer than it needed to. Then he said, "You look tired." I blinked. That was not in the script. His first line in Chapter 2 was supposed to be, "You are the new one. Do not touch anything in my study." Cold, direct, mildly unfriendly, entirely in character for early story Caius, who had not yet had his heart cracked open by 300 pages of Elliot Vaughan. He had not said that. He had looked at me like I was a person whose well-being he had a passing thought about, which was absolutely not what was supposed to happen. "I slept well, my lord," I said carefully. "Thank you." He looked at me for another moment that was slightly too long. His eyes moved over my face with something in them I truly could not name. And then, and I want to be very precise here because it mattered more than it should have, the corner of his mouth moved. It was tiny. It was barely anything. It was the smallest possible motion that could still technically count as an expression rather than a twitch. But I had read this novel. I knew this character. And in 300 pages of Crown of the Fallen Star, Lord Caius Dawnhart almost never smiled. When he did, the author had made a whole thing about it. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me standing in my doorway alone. I put my hand over my heart. It was doing something unreasonable. No, absolutely no. I was a background character. I had 4 lines of dialogue and a name with no surname, and my entire narrative purpose was to hand over 1 cup of tea and disappear. That almost smile was nothing. It was a quirk. It was muscle movement. It meant nothing. I went down to the kitchen, prepared the morning tea tray with hands that were completely steady, and told myself very firmly that I had imagined it. The head housekeeper, a broad-shouldered woman named Mrs. Holt who had the energy of someone who had run large households for decades and found it mostly irritating, showed me the morning schedule with efficient briskness. Tea delivered to the study by 8. Reports sorted and waiting on the desk. Lunch in the smaller dining room, not the grand one. Lord Caius did not like being fussed over. He did not like being asked if he needed anything. He did not like noise before his second cup of tea. He did not like the fire too high in the mornings. I listened and nodded and filed all of it away alongside what I already knew from the novel, and by noon I had developed a rhythm that seemed to work. What I had not planned for was being too good at it. I sorted his morning reports in the order he preferred, weighted by urgency, then by estate category, without being told that this was the order he preferred. I knew it because the novel had mentioned, once, that Caius found it deeply irritating when correspondence was sorted alphabetically rather than by relevance. I refilled his tea without interrupting the sentence he was reading. When the morning light shifted and came sharp through the east window at 9:30, I adjusted the curtain before he could squint. He noticed. He did not say anything about it. But he noticed, and I caught him watching me from the corner of his eye when I moved to fix the curtain, and his expression was the one I already did not have a name for. At 10:15, I was passing the north gallery entrance with a stack of clean linens for the upper rooms, and Lord Caius was standing at the far window with his back to me. In the novel, he stood here every morning. It was one of the only moments the author had pulled back from his controlled exterior to show something more honest. He stood here and he thought about the letter his father had left him, the one he had never opened. It would become a plot point in Chapter 7. Right now it was just a man at a window, carrying something quietly, and the author had written that he looked, in these moments, small in a way he never looked anywhere else. I kept walking. I carried the linens up the stairs. I did not look back. That was his private moment, and I was staff, and I had exactly zero business standing in doorways watching my employer process grief. I set the linens down at the top of the stairs. Then I went back to the kitchen and made a second cup of tea. I brought it to the north gallery entrance and knocked once, lightly, on the door frame. Caius turned. His expression shifted through several things very quickly before settling back into its usual controlled surface. He looked at the cup. "I thought you might like something warm, my lord," I said. "The morning is cold and you have been in here for a while." He crossed the room and took the cup. He did not say thank you, which was consistent with his character, but he wrapped both hands around it in a way that suggested the warmth was welcome. "You were not asked to bring this," he said. "No, my lord. How did you know I was here?" "Mrs. Holt mentioned your morning walk," I said. "Safe." "True enough." He turned back to the window and looked out at the estate grounds, the gray sky, the bare winter trees along the far path. He sipped the tea. I waited for him to dismiss me. He did not dismiss me. After almost a full minute, he said, "The grounds look better than they did last spring." "I would not know, my lord. I only just arrived." "No," he said, "you wouldn't." He said it quietly, like he was noting something to himself. Then, Wren. It was the first time he had used my name. "My lord, you are unusual," he said simply. He did not look at me when he said it. He kept his eyes on the window, but there was something in the way he said it that was not a criticism. I bowed. "I will leave you to your morning, my lord." I walked back to the corridor with careful, steady steps. And then I stopped at the wall around the corner and stood there for a full 20 seconds with my back against the stone and my heart beating embarrassingly fast. He had used my name. He had said I was unusual. He had smiled. Almost. But still, I had 4 lines of dialogue left. I was already in trouble. I could feel it. The way you feel a story shifting under you, changing direction, becoming something the author did not write. I was a background character standing in the foreground, and I needed to step back before the narrative got confused. I straightened my collar, picked up the empty tray, and went back to work. I was very professional about it. Elliot Vaughan arrived on a Tuesday, which I had been counting down to since I first opened my eyes in this world. His arrival was supposed to be the real beginning of the story. Chapter 3, titled The Guest and the Cold Lord. Elliot was the main event. He was the one the story was actually about. Bright and warm and so cheerfully determined to crack open Lord Caius Dawnhart that 300 pages of resistance barely slowed him down. He was the right person, the written person, the one who was supposed to be here. I stood in the line of servants at the front entrance with the rest of the household staff and told myself this was good. This was the story getting back on track. Once Elliot was here, the focus would shift. Caius would have somewhere else to direct his attention. I could step back into the edges where I belonged. Elliot arrived on a gray horse with too much luggage and a laugh that reached the entrance steps before he did. He was exactly as described. Golden hair, warm brown eyes, and an energy that made the whole gray morning feel slightly more manageable. He swung off his horse before the stable boy could assist, shook Mrs. Holt's hand like she was an old friend he had simply not met yet, and then began moving down the line of servants with a kind of genuine attention that most guests never bothered with. When he reached me, he stopped. "You're new," he said, not unkindly. More like he was noting an interesting fact. "Yes, my lord. I am Rin, the head butler." I bowed slightly. "Fantastic." His face lit up. "You look like someone who actually has things under control." The last butler I met at this estate had the energy of a man who was always 5 minutes away from a catastrophe he was too proud to mention. I almost smiled. "I try to manage in advance, my lord." "Brilliant. I'm going to ask you things. Constantly and without warning. Is that acceptable?" "Of course, my lord. I'll do my best." He beamed. And it was such a genuine, uncomplicated smile that I understood immediately why the author had made him the love interest. He was easy to be around. He made rooms feel warmer. He was exactly what Caius needed, and I felt something settle in my chest at the reminder. This was the right story. I just needed to stay out of its way. The first complication arrived approximately 20 minutes later. Elliot had been shown to his guest room, and the household was organizing his luggage when Lord Caius appeared in the east corridor. Not at the entrance. He had not come to greet Elliot, which was completely in line with Chapter 3 canon. But here, in the corridor where I was overseeing the careful arrangement of Elliot's considerable number of bags. He stopped in the doorway and looked around the corridor. Then he looked at me. "Is the green guest room prepared?" he asked. "Yes, my lord. Fresh linens this morning, the fireplace cleaned and fresh wood set." I also had the window latch on the east side repaired. It was stiff, and I thought a longer-term guest would find it bothersome. He went still in a way that was becoming familiar to me. "You had it repaired this morning," he said. "Yes, my lord. I noticed it yesterday during the room inspection." "No one asked you to notice it." "No, my lord. I just thought it would be a small thing easily fixed before it became a bigger inconvenience." He looked at me with that expression again. The one I kept failing to name, like I had said something that required quiet processing. "Tell the guest that dinner is at 7, he said finally. "I will be in my study until then." "Of course, my lord." He left, did not look toward the guest room, did not inquire about Elliot by name, entirely consistent with Chapter 3 canon, where Caius was supposed to be coolly absent while Elliot did the chasing. Good. The story was on track. Elliot materialized at my elbow approximately 4 seconds after Caius disappeared around the corner. "Was that Caius?" he said in a delighted whisper. "Yes, my lord." He came out of his study, where he apparently planned to stay until dinner, based on what I was just told. Specifically to ask about the guest room through you, rather than sending a note or asking Mrs. Holt or simply trusting that the household prepared the room as always. He pressed a hand over his heart with the expression of a man beholding something precious. And he did all of this without acknowledging that I, the actual guest, was standing 20 feet away in plain view. He may not have. "He absolutely saw me," Elliot said cheerfully. "He looked directly at me for about half a second and then looked at you instead. I watched it happen." He tilted his head. "Interesting. My lord. I'm not upset about it," he added quickly.
"I'm genuinely fascinated."
"This is going to be a very entertaining visit." He smiled at me, warm and real. "You're going to be important to this story, aren't you, Ren?" It was not a question. "I am staff, my lord," I said carefully. Said Elliot, in a tone that indicated he had opinions about this which he was choosing to keep to himself for now. He wandered off to explore the corridor with his hands in his pockets and the energy of someone who had arrived exactly where he wanted to be. I went back to organizing the luggage. The next 4 days ran with something close to routine. I had the household in order. I knew where everything was and how it worked and what Caius preferred. And because I knew all of this, the estate ran smoothly in a way that Mrs. Holt said, a little grudgingly, was nicer than she had expected. Elliot adjusted to the household with remarkable ease. He was genuinely not difficult to have around, which I suspected was one of his best qualities. He did not demand attention. He found his own rhythms. He showed up to dinner and was pleasant and asked Caius careful, non-threatening questions, and Caius gave short answers, and the whole thing moved at the pace the novel had described. What the novel had not described was Lord Caius calling me to his study at 9 in the evening on the 4th day. I knocked and entered and found him at his desk with the candle burned low and a spread of papers and an expression that was doing something careful with what I suspected might be mild frustration. "Sit down," he said. "My lord."
"Sit."
I sat in the chair across from his desk because arguing with him about it seemed more disruptive than simply complying. I folded my hands and waited. He picked up a piece of paper and held it across the desk toward me. I took it. It was the monthly estate accounts annotated in my handwriting. I had noticed 12 small errors during a routine review and had noted them for Mrs. Holt. I had not expected them to reach him. "You found 12 errors," he said. "Yes, my lord. Small ones, most of them. A few duplicated entries, 2 miscategorized expenditures, 1 addition that was simply done incorrectly. Nothing that would cause a serious problem in the short term, but over time they accumulate. The head housekeeper has managed these accounts for 9 years. I know, my lord. I have great respect for Mrs. Holt's management. Numbers are simply something I notice easily. I did not mean it as a criticism of her work." He looked at me, long and quiet and considering, the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand. "Where did you study?" he asked. My stomach did a slow, complicated turn. I had been expecting this question since I fixed the accounts, and I still did not have a fully satisfying answer. "I am largely self-taught, my lord," I said, which was sort of true, in the sense that my accounting degree came from a university in a world that did not exist here, so it functioned narratively as something I had simply learned. Self-taught. He said it like he was testing the weight of it. I have always been good with numbers and patterns, and I read widely. He was quiet again. He had a particular quality of silence that was not uncomfortable exactly. It was more like the silence of a room where someone was thinking properly, taking up space with thought rather than filling it with noise. I had come to recognize it. I had come to wait through it without fidgeting, which was harder than it sounded. I would like you to continue reviewing the monthly accounts, he said. I blinked. My lord, you have the eye for it. More importantly, you have the honesty to note what you find without worrying about whose territory you are stepping into. He picked up his pen and turned back to his papers, which was his version of concluding a conversation. I will inform Mrs. Holt that you have my authorization. Of course, my lord. I stood, gathered the annotated accounts. Is there anything else? He did not look up, but the tips of his ears, I noticed, were very slightly a different color than the rest of his face. No, he said. That is all. I bowed and left. In the corridor, I stood against the wall. He had made me sit down. He had asked where I studied. He had said I was observant and honest and given me additional responsibility. And his ears had gone pink, which was not something Lord Caius Dawnhart did in the novel. Not once. Not even in his most vulnerable Chapter 7 scene. This was a problem. The next morning I was carrying the breakfast things to the east dining room when Elliot materialized beside me, clearly having been waiting somewhere nearby for exactly this moment. So, he said pleasantly, falling into step with me, hands behind his back like we were simply taking a stroll. Lord Caius spoke with you privately in his study for roughly 45 minutes last night. I nearly upset the tray. How do you know that? The household staff are wonderful conversationalists once you learn what to ask, he said. And I am very good at asking things. He glanced at me sideways. He has never done that with a butler before. Mrs. Holt seemed quite surprised by it, actually. She mentioned it while we were both pretending not to listen at the same time in the kitchen. It was about the estate accounts, I said. Entirely professional. Of course it was. His voice was smooth as still water. And the cup of tea you brought to the North Gallery last week? Also entirely professional? I kept my eyes on the dining room door at the end of the hall. I was attending to the household. And the curtain you adjusted at 9:30 every morning before he can squint at the light? Good service anticipates needs. Rain. He said my name with such gentle, terrible patience. I want to say something, and I want you to hear it without immediately explaining it away. I opened the dining room door. I have met a lot of people, Elliot said, following me in. I have watched a lot of people around each other. And I am telling you, as a person with genuinely no agenda here other than observation, that Lord Caius Dawnhart looks at you differently than he looks at anyone else in this estate. Possibly differently than he has looked at anyone in a very long time. I set the tray down carefully. He is a thorough and attentive employer, I said. Elliot made a sound. It was the sound of a man who had expected exactly this answer and found it both predictable and a little sad. All right, he said. I'll leave it for now. He picked up a bread roll from the tray, which was slightly outside his rights as a guest, but I chose not to address it. Just tell me one thing honestly, if I can. He looked at me steadily. Are you happy here? It was such a simple question, such an unexpectedly direct one. I looked at the table and the morning light coming through the window and thought about the North Gallery and teacups and stone walls and a man who said my name like it was something he had decided to keep. Yes, I said, and I meant it. Elliot smiled at me, warm and quiet and real. Okay, he said, that's a start. It rained for 3 days straight in the second week of Elliot's stay, and the estate changed completely. Rain did something to old stone buildings that sunshine never could. It made the walls feel closer. The fireplaces became more important. People moved more slowly through the corridors, more carefully, like the weather had given everyone permission to take up slightly less space in the world. The sounds were different too, quieter in some ways, louder in others, The constant low percussion of water on old stone and the occasional drip from a windowsill that had not been checked properly. I did not mind it. I had always found rain clarifying. There was something honest about weather that did not pretend. Rain was rain. It did not apologize for being difficult. I noticed that Lord Caius worked more during rain. This was something the novel had mentioned exactly once, in a passing sentence that most readers would have skipped over. But I had not skipped it because I was the kind of reader who made notes in the margins, and the note I had made was, more productive in low weather possibly finds the isolation comforting. I had not known at the time that this information would be useful. Now I made sure there was always something warm on his desk when I came through with papers, and I made sure the east window in his study, the one that let in a draft when the wind came from the north, was properly sealed before the day started. He noticed. He always noticed. He did not say anything about it, but his eyes tracked what I did in the room in a way that was specific and deliberate, and I was becoming increasingly aware of being watched in a way I did not know what to do with. On the second day of rain, I was in the library reorganizing a shelf that had become disordered when some estate records had been moved through the week before. It was quiet work and I found it satisfying. Putting things in right order, making sense out of disorder. I was in the middle of it when the library door opened. Elliot came in, slightly damp at the shoulders, shaking water off his coat and looking pleased with himself in the way he usually looked pleased with himself, which was comfortably rather than smugly. "Hiding?" he asked. "Working," I said, the noble tradition of calling necessary things by more dignified names. He came to lean against the shelf beside where I was organizing, watching me sort books with an expression I recognized as his thinking face. He had a very readable face when he chose to let it be. "Can I tell you something?" "You are going to tell me regardless," I said, which was accurate. He smiled. "Caius asked about you at breakfast." My hands slowed on the books. "Specifically about me?" I said. "Very specifically. He asked whether I had seen you this morning, and when I said I had not, he said, and I am quoting exactly because I memorized it, 'He is not in his usual places.'" Elliot tilted his head. "He knows where your usual places are. He has mapped them out. And when you were not in them this morning, he noticed and mentioned it at the breakfast table, which is the most words he has said during a meal since I arrived." I put a book on the shelf. "He was checking on the staff," I said. "Ren," Elliot said. "He asked about you by name. Not the staff, not the household, not whether everything was running smoothly. He asked where you were." The rain came against the library windows in a long, steady wave. I listened to it. "He is a careful employer," I said. "You are doing it again," Elliot said, but gently. Not frustrated. Just noting it. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he settled more fully against the shelf and looked at me with the expression that I had started to think of as his honest face. The one underneath the easy warmth, where he was actually quite sharp. "I'm not trying to push you somewhere you don't want to go," he said. "I just want to say what I see clearly, and you can do with it whatever you choose. What I see is, he is different with you. Not in a way he has decided to be. In a way he has not noticed yet, which is, I think, more important." He paused. "People do not change how they are without realizing it unless something is reaching them past their defenses." I looked at the shelf. "He has a story," I said carefully. "There are things he needs to work through. Things he needs to reach on his own, or with someone who—" "With someone who what?" Elliot asked. I did not finish the sentence. Elliot pushed off the shelf and picked up a book from the cart I was working from, turning it over in his hands. "I'll stop for now," he said. "I just want you to know that I see it, in case no one else is saying it." He wandered toward the window with the book, easy and unhurried. "Also, that east shelf you're working on? The history section goes chronologically in that collection, not alphabetically. Drives him absolutely mad when it's done the other way." I looked at the shelf. I had been doing it alphabetically. I started moving the books. "How do you know that?" I asked. He mentioned it, briefly and in passing and pretending not to care. But he mentioned it. Elliot smiled at the window. "He talks about you more than he thinks he does." I did not say anything to that. I reorganized the history shelf with careful hands and listened to the rain and told myself, very firmly, that this changed nothing about my situation. At 7 in the evening, a problem developed with the main gate hinge. The gate needed to close properly overnight for the estate's security, and with the head groundskeeper Mr. Farrow down with a cold and his second uncertain about the repair, it fell to me to go out and oversee it. I borrowed a heavier coat from the staff room and went out into the rain without particular drama. This was not an unusual situation for someone running a household. Things broke. You fixed them. What I had not accounted for was Lord Caius appearing at the gate. He came around the corner of the east wall and stopped when he saw me, and his expression did something that was not quite alarm but was adjacent to it. He was wearing his good coat. Not a raincoat, not practical outerwear, just his regular evening coat, which was now getting rained on, and he was looking at me like I was a problem he had not anticipated. "Why are you out here?" he said. "The gate hinge needed repair before morning, my lord," I said. "Security would be compromised overnight if it was left. Mr. Farrow is ill, and the others were less certain of the process. It is raining." "Yes, my lord." "Where are the groundskeepers?" "2 of them are here." I gestured to the 2 young men standing nearby with tools, looking slightly damp and slightly relieved that someone in authority had arrived. "I have been walking them through it." Caius looked at them. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the gate with the particular focused attention of a man deciding what to do about a situation. "Go inside," he said to the groundskeepers. Not unkindly, just clearly. "Send someone with the proper wrench." They went, confused but grateful. He stepped forward and stood beside me at the gate, looking at the hinge. "You know how to do this," he said. It was not quite a question. "I know how to do a lot of things," I said. He looked at me sideways. "Where did you learn to fix gate hinges?" "Practical upbringing," I said, which was true, in the sense that I had grown up helping my grandfather with repairs around his house every summer, and apparently the muscle memory and the knowledge had transmigrated along with me. The groundskeeper returned with the right tools. I walked him through the repair, talking him through each step clearly, making sure he understood what he was doing so he could do it again without me, and Lord Caius stood beside me in the rain and watched the whole thing without speaking. Not supervising it. Not interfering. Just standing there in the rain in his good coat, because he had come out here and was not ready to leave. When the hinge was done and the gate swung clean and latched properly, I turned to say something practical and professional about the repair, and found Caius much closer than I had expected. The rain was still coming down, steady and cold, and it had done what rain did to careful people. It had made his dark hair flat against his forehead and his sharp face softer and his silver eyes more open than they were in the dry warmth of the estate's rooms. He was looking at me without his public expression, without the controlled neutral, just looking in the rain at close distance, with something in his face that I had been trying very hard not to look at directly for weeks now. "You should go inside, my lord," I said. My voice was steady. I was very proud of it. "You will catch cold." His brow moved, just slightly. "So will you." "I am staff, my lord. It comes with the work." "It does not," he said, and he sounded genuinely, quietly bothered by this idea, like it was something he wanted to correct. "Come inside." He turned and walked back toward the estate entrance, and after a moment I followed because there was nothing else to do. We walked through the rain in silence, and the whole way I was very carefully not thinking about how it had felt to have him standing that close, looking at me like that, in the rain. We reached the entrance hall. He held the door open. He held the door open for me. I walked through it. He followed and let it close behind us. We stood in the warm entrance hall, both of us dripping on the stone floor, and he looked at me with an expression that was almost rueful, like he was aware that holding a door for his butler was a slightly unusual thing and had done it anyway. Then, quietly, he said, "Next time, tell someone before you go out in weather like that." He walked off toward his study. I stood in the entrance hall. He had said next time, like he was already thinking ahead, like my future actions were something he was building plans around, like I was going to be here long enough for there to be a pattern of next times. From the top of the staircase, where they had clearly stationed themselves at some point during the gate repair, Elliot and two of the more senior housemaids were watching me with expressions ranging from warm to delighted. Elliot gave a small, satisfied wave. I pointed at him with clear intent. He pressed his lips together against a smile and turned away, and the housemaids dispersed with unconvincing casualness, and I stood alone in the entrance hall and tried to remember what professional composure felt like. Here is the thing about being a transmigrated character with advanced knowledge of the source material. At some point, the source material stops being useful. I had been tracking myself against the novel's timeline since I arrived. Chapter 2, The Tea. Chapter 3, Elliot's Arrival. Chapter 4, The First Real Caius and Elliot Confrontation. Chapter 5, The Letter from the Capital. Every beat, every scene, every small piece of plot that I had read in my original life was like a map I was following through this world. Helpful, grounding, something to orient myself with. The problem was that the map kept being wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not in ways that broke the world. But in the small, insistent ways that matter more over time. Caius was supposed to be indifferent to his household staff, not asking about their whereabouts at breakfast. He was supposed to conduct his North Gallery mornings in complete solitude, not with tea that appeared from nowhere and a butler who knocked first. He was supposed to handle the Sefton letter alone and in silence, not well. That part had not happened yet. But I was beginning to suspect it would not happen the way it was written. I was now in the events of what should have been Chapter 6. I had not disappeared. If anything, I was more present than ever, and I did not know if that was good or terrible or both. The thing that made everything significantly worse happened on a Thursday morning. Lord Caius received a letter from the capital. I knew this because I brought it to him. It arrived with the Morning Post and bore the seal of Lord Sefton's house. And I knew from the novel that this letter was the mechanism for getting Caius to the midwinter gathering in the capital, which was where he and Elliot would have their first real, honest conversation. The gathering was the novel's second major turning point. It needed to happen. What I did not anticipate was what happened after Caius read it. I was in the east corridor at mid-morning, checking the window seals against another coming rainstorm, when I heard footsteps. Deliberate ones. The particular rhythm of someone who knew where they were going. I turned and Lord Caius was at the far end of the corridor, letter in hand, his expression doing something controlled and careful with what I suspected was actual anger. He looked at me across the length of the corridor. "Walk with me," he said. This was not something that happened. Lords did not walk with butlers for conversation. They walked with advisors and trusted guests and social equals. They did not collect their household staff and take them somewhere to talk. I walked with him. He went to the North Gallery, of course he did, it was his thinking place, and he stood at the window and held the letter and was silent for 45 seconds. I counted, because counting kept me from doing anything unhelpful with my face. "Sefton is calling in a debt," he said finally. I waited. He wants me to appear at the midwinter gathering and publicly endorse his trade proposal. If I do not attend, he will claim political absence and use it to undermine the estate's standing in the capital. If I attend and do not endorse the proposal, he will say I went back on an implied agreement. He paused. He has constructed it so that both options damage me. In the novel, Caius never said any of this to anyone. He took the letter and thought about it and made his decision alone. That was consistent with his character. He had learned to keep his own counsel because his early life had taught him that depending on people's advice meant depending on people, and that had not historically gone well for him. He was telling me, "Could you attend without explicitly endorsing?" I said. My voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone thinking out loud rather than offering an opinion. He looked at me, physically present, publicly silent on the proposal itself. I continued. "You honor the attendance obligation. The letter almost certainly specifies presence rather than vocal support, because a forced endorsement holds no political value. But you say nothing about the proposal during the gathering. Sefton cannot claim your voice. He can only claim your appearance, which he already has." The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence. The kind that meant someone was taking something seriously. "That is," Lord Caius said slowly, "a genuinely useful approach. I apologize if it oversteps, my lord. You did not ask for
Rain.
His voice was quiet but precise. I came to you. I stopped. I did not have to walk to this corridor, he said. My study is on the other side of the house. I could have sat with this letter alone, as I always do. He turned back to the window. I did not. The rain that had been threatening all morning was starting now, gentle against the gallery glass. I find it easier to think, he said, when you are in the room. My heart did something it had absolutely no business doing. My lord, I said, and I was very proud of how steady my voice was. It is not a compliment, he said. It is an observation. I am not sure what it means. He looked at the rain. But it is true. I stood there and I thought about Elliot, about 300 pages of story, about the love arc that this man was supposed to have. I thought about bright gold hair and cheerful patience and the right person standing in the right place. You should take Elliot to the gathering, I said. Caius went still. He is effective in those rooms, I said, keeping my voice practical and even. He makes people comfortable without being obvious about it. He has social connections in the capital. I believe he knows several people in Sefton's circle through his family. Having him beside you would change the impression you make. It would signal ease rather than defensiveness, which is the opposite of what Sefton wants to provoke. Caius turned and looked at me, not with the controlled neutral, with something more open, more direct, more complicated. You want me to take Elliot, he said. I think it would be strategically beneficial, my lord. And I stopped, considered, continued. And I think it would be good for both of you in ways beyond the political. He looked at me for a very long moment. His eyes moved over my face in the specific way they did when he was reading something he had not decided how to interpret yet. You are always thinking about what helps me, he said. Not quite a question. That is my job, my lord. No, he said, simple and direct and quiet. It is not. He folded the letter and left the gallery. I stood at the window and watched the rain and told myself I had done the right thing. The correct thing. The thing that served the story and served Caius and kept the right people in the right places. I had done the right thing. My hands at my sides were entirely steady. They were leaving at dawn. I had known for 3 days that Lord Caius and Elliot would travel to the capital for the midwinter gathering. The travel time was 3 days each way by carriage. The gathering itself lasted 10 days, and the whole journey would keep them away from the estate for a little over 2 weeks. This was, from a story perspective, exactly what needed to happen. The gathering was where Elliot would finally stop being patient and simply ask Caius what he meant, and Caius would not have an answer ready, and something would shift between them in the way it was supposed to. I had been preparing for their departure for 4 days. I knew how to do this. I knew what Caius needed in his trunk, the right formal coats for different levels of occasion, the estate documents he might want to review during travel, his personal reading books, the notes I had prepared on the political landscape of the gathering and the individuals he would most likely need to manage carefully. I had prepared a separate folder of materials for Elliot too, because that was also my job, and Elliot had said very plainly that he had never been good at organizing this kind of thing and had trusted me to manage it, which I had found unexpectedly touching. Everything was ready. The trunks were packed. The carriage had been checked and the horses prepared. I had done everything on the list and several things that were not on the list, and the estate was organized and the household briefed on the 2-week routine in their absence. I went to the study at 10 in the evening for a final check of the document packet. I had been hoping to do this quickly, before Caius came in for his evening work session. But the study door was already open when I reached it and the lamp was already lit. He was at his desk. He looked up when I entered. My lord, I said. I was just checking the document packet for the journey. I will not be long. He set down his pen. Sit down, he said. I sat in the chair across from his desk because arguing with it took longer than complying, and Caius looked at the document packet on the desk between us for a moment without speaking. You packed my trunk, he said. Yes, my lord. You included the Harmon estate reports. I thought you might want to review them during the carriage journey. 3 days each way is a significant amount of uninterrupted time, and the Harmon reports have been delayed since. I had not thought of that. You were occupied with the capital preparations, my lord. The Harmon matter was easy to overlook. You did not overlook it. I did not have an answer for that was not either too honest or too dismissive, so I did not offer one. He picked up the document packet and turned it over in his hands. Then he set it down and looked at me and said, "I want you to come to the Capitol." The room was very quiet. "My lord, you are useful there," he said. "More so than here for 2 weeks. The household can manage without you. Mrs. Holt is more than capable. But the Capitol," he stopped. Rephrased, "I would work better there with you present." "Lord Elliot will be there," I said carefully. "He is very capable in those social situations, and you have your regular Capitol household staff who know the townhouse." "I do not want the Capitol staff," he said. It was not rude. It was simply direct in the way he was direct when he was being honest rather than polite. "They are efficient. They do not know me." "My lord, you know," he said, "without being told, that I take my second cup of tea before I open correspondence in the morning. You know that I find political reports easier to process when they are sorted by urgency rather than alphabetically. You know that I stand in the North Gallery for 40 minutes every morning because something about the light helps me think." He paused. "I have not told you any of those things." I looked at him. "I observed them," I said. "Exactly," he said. "You observe. And you use what you observe to make things easier without being asked and without making it obvious that you have noticed, which means I am never in the uncomfortable position of feeling watched." He met my eyes. "That is not a small thing. That is a very specific skill, and I would like it in the Capitol with me." The fire was going low in the grate. Outside the windows, the estate was quiet in the way estates are quiet before dawn, which is not real quiet but the absence of the particular sounds that belong to daylight. "My lord," I said, and my voice came out less steady than I intended. "I do not think it would be appropriate." "Why?" "Because—" I stopped, tried to find the right words for something I could not fully explain. "Because I am staff, and the Capitol is, there are impressions to manage there, and my presence at your side in those rooms would not." "Would not what?" I looked at the desk between us. "It would not look like what it is," I said. The silence that followed that was very specific. Caius looked at me with his open, reading expression, and I looked at the desk, and the fire crackled once. "What is it?" he asked. My hands were flat on my knees. I could feel my own heartbeat in my palms. "It is staff accompanying their employer on a professional journey," I said. "That is what it is." "Yes," he said, very quietly. "That is what it is." Something in his voice told me we were both aware that we were not entirely talking about the Capitol trip. "I sleep better," he said after a long pause, "when I know where you are in the evening." I stared at him. He said it the way he said things when he was being precise rather than careful, not with flourish, not with any visible awareness that it was a significant sentence. Just as an observation he was choosing to share because it was true. "My lord," I said. I could not think of what to say after that. "That is," he stopped, looked at the desk. Something moved across his face that was the most uncertainty I had ever seen from him. "I am aware that is an unusual thing to say." "Yes, my lord." I said it anyway. "Yes," I said. "You did." We looked at each other across the desk. I should have said something professional. I should have said something about the travel schedule or the document packet or literally any other thing in the world. I should have picked up the papers and stood and bowed and left and kept the safe, careful distance I had been maintaining for weeks. "You should sleep, my lord," I said instead very softly. "You leave at dawn." He looked at me for a long moment. His silver eyes were very clear in the lamplight, and they were open in the way they almost never were in public. "Come to the Capitol," he said. Not demanding, something closer to asking. He stood and left the study. I sat at his desk for 5 minutes without moving. From somewhere in the corridor outside, in the voice of a man who had clearly been listening at the door for a concerning amount of time, Elliot said very quietly to apparently no one, "Oh, this is going to be a problem." I put my head down on the desk. He was absolutely right. I went to the Capitol. I want to be clear that this was a professional decision based on legitimate professional reasons. and the fact that I had been awake for most of the night before departure thinking about the specific way Caius had said I sleep better when I know where you are had absolutely nothing to do with it. He was my employer. He had made a reasonable request. There were real logistical reasons for a head butler to accompany his lord on a politically significant trip. These were all true things. I packed my own small trunk and was at the carriage before dawn. The 3-day journey was nothing like I expected and exactly like I should have expected. Elliot sat beside me and Caius sat across from us, and on the first day Caius read for several hours and I worked through correspondence from the estate and Elliot napped with the specific energy of a person who was very good at napping. On the second day, Caius set down his book at about noon, looked out the carriage window for a moment, and then looked at me. "Tell me what you know about the Midwinter Gathering's social structure," he said. So I told him. I had read the novel. I had paid attention to every detail about the capital and its politics, and I framed it carefully as things I had heard or read or gathered from correspondence, and I told him who would be there and which alliances mattered and where the pressure points were. He listened with the particular quality of attention he brought to things he found genuinely useful, absolute and uninterrupted and without any of the polite pretense of listening that most people performed. Elliot on my left gradually stopped pretending to nap and sat up and started listening too, and by the end of it all 3 of us were talking, which was something I had not anticipated. Caius talked while we traveled. He talked about the capital as he remembered it from childhood trips, before his father died, when the journeys had been an event rather than an obligation. He talked about the townhouse and how it had always felt too formal to be comfortable. He talked about the Midwinter Gathering as a social performance he had attended for years without ever finding enjoyable. I mostly listened. I asked small questions when they were useful. But once, when he said something about the way the capital townhouse had felt during his first winter there alone after his father's death, I said without thinking, "That is why you find the estate easier to breathe in." He looked at me. "The estate is yours," I said. "The capital townhouse is a stage." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, exactly." Elliot looked out the window with a small expression I chose not to analyze. The capital arrived at midday on the 3rd day, loud and gray and winter-sharp. The Dawnhart townhouse was a tall, narrow building in the old district, well-staffed and formal in a way the estate was not. I slipped into the rhythm of it quickly, new household, new layout, but the same fundamental logic, and spent the first afternoon getting everything properly organized. The Midwinter Gathering events began that evening with a formal dinner. I was not a guest. I was staff. I stood near the wall in the correct position for senior household staff at a formal event, visible and available but not intrusive, and watched Lord Caius work the room with the controlled efficiency of a man who was very good at performing social ease despite finding it entirely unpleasant. Elliot was extraordinary at it. He moved through that room like he had been born in it, which I supposed in some ways he had. He made the right people laugh. He made Sefton's associates feel individually seen, which was a skill that took years to develop. He positioned himself near Caius at exactly the right moments and drifted away at exactly the right moments, and the effect was to make Caius look open and capable rather than closed off and severe. I watched it and felt something complicated. Respect, mostly. Something more uncomfortable underneath the respect. 40 minutes into the dinner, Caius crossed the room. He crossed the room entirely and came to stand beside me at the wall. He did not say anything. He did not have a message to deliver or an instruction to give. He just came and stood beside me with his evening glass of wine and looked out at the room with his public face on, and we stood there together like that for 6 minutes. His hand at his side turned slightly, just once. His fingers moved as if they were going to touch my sleeve. They did not. Someone called him from across the room and he went, smooth and controlled, and he did not look back. I stood at the wall, 6 minutes, in front of everyone in that room, not looking at me but choosing to be beside me instead of anyone he actually knew. That night, Elliot knocked on my door. I let him in. He sat in the chair by the window and looked at me for a moment with his honest face. "I want to ask you something directly," he said. "All right. Do you have feelings for Caius?" The room was very quiet for a long time. "He is my employer," I said. "That is not an answer, and we both know it." His voice was not unkind, just clear. I looked at the floor, at the rug under my feet, which was the practical burgundy of a room that expected a lot of use. Then, because Elliot deserved more than deflection, I said quietly, "It does not matter what I feel. It matters enormously. It does not because..." I stopped. Because he has a story to walk through, and there are things he needs. And you are... I looked up at him. You are good for him. You make him reach. You have patience I do not have, and you show up every day and you do not give up, and that is what someone like Caius needs. Elliot looked at me for a long, careful moment. "Run," he said quietly. "I am going to tell you something I should probably have said earlier." He leaned forward slightly in the chair. "I am not in love with Caius Dawnhart." I stared at him. "I came to the estate because my family wanted a match," he said. "A political connection. A socially advantageous situation. I came because I was told to come, more or less, and I thought maybe..." I had met him twice. He was interesting. I thought maybe something could grow. He paused. "And then I arrived, and I saw how the estate worked, and I saw how he moved through his own home, and I watched him look at you. He met my eyes. And I understood very clearly that this was not my story. I could not speak." "I like him," Elliot said.
I genuinely do.
"I think he is worth knowing, and I hope we are friends. And I plan to make sure these next weeks go well for him because that is what I can do." He paused. "But I am not heartbroken, Ren. I am sitting in a nice room in the capital watching something happen between two people who are both extremely committed to not letting it happen, and I find it, honestly, compelling in a way my own feelings never were." I looked at my hands. "He stood beside you for 6 minutes tonight," Elliot said. "He left a conversation with Lord Sefton's second-in-command to come and stand beside you. Not me. Not someone he knows. You." He sat back. "What does that tell you?" "That he is." "Don't say comfortable," Elliot said. "I was not going to say comfortable." "What were you going to say?" I looked at the window, at the dark capital night outside, the distant lights of buildings that had been standing for 100 years. "I don't know how long I'll be here," I said. "I have said that before and I mean it more than I can explain. I cannot promise him anything. I cannot promise myself anything. And knowing that makes it..." I stopped. "It makes it very difficult to let anything be real." Elliot was quiet. "He knows you might leave," he said finally. "You told him. And he asked you anyway to come to the capital." He stood.
Reden.
"Some people decide the time they have is enough, even if it is not all the time they wanted." He moved to the door. "That is not a small thing. That is actually one of the bravest things a person can decide." He left. I sat for a long time in the room in the capital and looked at nothing and thought about a man who slept better knowing where I was. The letter arrived on the 5th day of the capital trip, and it arrived in a way that made my blood run cold. Not dramatically cold. Not in the way of dramatic stories where people gasp and clutch things. Just a quiet, settling coldness, the kind that happens when something tells you that the world has been paying more attention to you than you realized. It was on the desk of the small office the Dawnhart townhouse maintained for estate paperwork. Someone had placed it there at some point during the morning, between my first and second visits to the room. It was folded simply, sealed with plain wax. No crest, no mark, and my name was written on the outside in handwriting I did not recognize. Just my name.
Reden.
I sat down at the desk and opened it. Inside, 11 words in the same unfamiliar hand. "You were not meant to stay. The script is asking for you back." I sat with those 11 words for a very long time. The fire in the small office was going well. The window showed the gray capital morning. Somewhere in the house above me I could hear the ordinary sounds of a household going about its day. Footsteps, a door, the distant sound of something being moved in the kitchen. Someone in this house knew something that should have been impossible to know. I burned the letter in the office fireplace. Caught quickly and was gone in 30 seconds. Then I sat for another full minute making sure I had my face under control, and then I went to find Elliot. He was in the townhouse library, reading because Elliot read in every free moment with the dedication of someone who found books reliably more pleasant than most situations. He looked up when I came in and immediately set the book face down. You look like someone who needs to sit down, he said. I sat down. I told him. Not everything, not the novel, not the other world, not the full truth of why the words the script is asking for you back were specifically terrifying rather than generically threatening. But I told him that I had received an anonymous letter in a room I had been in and out of all morning, that it warned me I was not supposed to be here, and that someone in this household had knowledge of my situation that they should not have. Elliot listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for several seconds. You burned it, he said. Yes. Why? Because keeping it meant there was evidence, and evidence can be used. If someone is trying to use me to create complications for Caius in the capital, then the less proof there is of anything unusual, the safer his position. Elliot looked at me for a moment. You thought about his position before you thought about your own. That is what I do, I said. I know. He stood and went to the window, thinking with his hands in his coat pockets. Someone in this house wrote that letter or had it delivered here. That means they know who you are, or at least who you are in this story, and they have access to Lord Caius's townhouse. He turned. Who would want you gone? I thought about it carefully. Someone who noticed that I am not behaving the way I should be, I said slowly. A background butler stays invisible. I have not been invisible. I have influenced the estate accounts. I was at the dinner last night. I made a political suggestion about Lord Sefton that apparently reached people's ears. I stopped. Someone in Sefton's circle is watching Caius's people closely, and they noticed you standing beside him for 6 minutes at a formal dinner when an advisor should have been in that position, Elliot said. Yes. They think you have influence over him. I do not.
Reden.
Elliot's voice was patient but final. You have significant influence over Lord Caius Dawnhart. Whether you use it intentionally or not is one question. Whether it exists is a completely separate question, and the answer to the second one is yes, it absolutely does. I thought about Caius coming to find me in the East Corridor with the Sefton letter. About the North Gallery and the 6 minutes at the dinner wall. I need to tell him, I said. Yes, Elliot said. You do. We went to Caius together. He was in his study at 7 that evening, and he looked up when we came in with the particular alertness of someone who recognized that the specific combination of Run and Elliot arriving together at this hour meant something had happened. I told him, word for word, including the part where I burned it. He did not move during the telling. His face went through nothing visible. He simply listened with the total, precise attention of someone cataloging every detail. When I finished, the room was quiet. You burned the letter, he said. Yes, my lord. To protect the estate's position. Your position in the capital is already complicated by Sefton. I did not want to add to it. You protected me, he said. Again. My lord.
Reden.
He stood from his chair. Stop. He looked at me across the desk, and his eyes were doing the thing again. Open, direct, the thing underneath the controlled surface. Why do you keep doing that? I am simply. Why do you, he said more quietly, keep placing yourself behind my concerns, every single time, without being asked, without making anything of it? You came out in rain. You burned evidence that threatened you. You suggested I bring Elliot to the capital because it would help me. He stopped. He was close to the desk now. Close to where I was standing on the other side of it. Why? Elliot, I noticed, had drifted silently to the far window and appeared to be reading the city below with intense interest. Because, I said, and I had no professional answer to give. I had used all my professional answers. Because I care what happens to you. He looked at me. That is not, he said softly, a professional answer. No, I said. It is not. The room was very still. You said, he said, when we were here before, in this study the night before we left, that you do not know how long you will be here. What did you mean? I should have given a safe answer. I should have found some way to explain it that made sense within this world. Something about uncertain positions and changeable circumstances. Instead I said very quietly, I am not from here. He went still. Not from the estate, I said quickly. Not from this region. I mean, I am not from this world, my lord. I woke up here. I did not choose to come. I do not fully understand how I am here or whether I will stay, and I have been trying to do things correctly and stay in my place and not complicate your life, and I am very aware that I have failed at that. The silence that followed was enormous. That, Caius said slowly, is the most honest thing you have ever said to me. My lord, Caius. He said it simply. In this room, with no one else, use my name. I looked at him. He waited. Caius, I said. The word was very quiet. It sat in the room between us, and neither of us moved away from it. His hand came across the desk. Slow, deliberate, asking without asking. His fingers touched the back of my wrist. Just the lightest contact, the tips of his fingers against my wrist bone like a question. Elliot said from the window, in the voice of a man doing his best, I am going to go check on something important in the hall. And the door opened and closed behind him. We were alone. Caius's fingers stayed on my wrist. His eyes were on mine, and they were open in a way I had only ever seen in flashes before. Tell me the rest, he said. When you can. However much you can. I will wait. His fingers curved, just slightly around my wrist. But do not disappear without telling me. I don't want to go anywhere, I said. His grip tightened very slightly. And then, for the first time since I had woken up in this world, Lord Caius Dawnhart smiled. Not the almost smile. Not the corner of his mouth. A real one, small, careful, held back a little still because this was a man who did everything carefully, but real. Entirely and completely real. It changed his face the way light changes a room. It made him look younger. It made him look like he was standing somewhere he had not expected to be and finding it, to his considerable surprise, good. I was in so much trouble. I need to tell you what I figured out, because figuring it out took 3 more weeks and the answer surprised me. The journey back to the estate took 3 days, the same as before, and it was entirely different. Not dramatically different. Not in the loud way of stories where everything changes overnight. Quietly different, in the particular way that things are when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and both people know it, and neither of them quite knows what to do with it yet. Caius sat across from me in the carriage and read, as before. But now he read and occasionally looked up to say something about the book, about the passing landscape, about an estate matter that had occurred to him. Small things. Things he had no reason to share except that he wanted to. Elliot sat beside me and radiated satisfaction at a frequency that required no words. On the second day, Caius told me more about the estate as it had been when he was young. How his father had been a different man than people remembered, gentler in private, funnier. How the North Gallery had been full of people during the winter seasons of his childhood. His mother at the window with her embroidery, and his father arguing cheerfully with visiting friends about history, and how it had all simply stopped one winter and never resumed. You are not required to tell me these things, I said, not to push him away, just to be clear that I was not owed this. I know, he said. I want to. Elliot looked at the window. When we returned to the estate, the household welcomed us back with the contained efficiency of people who had managed well in our absence and were proud of it, which was the right response, and I told Mrs. Holt so, which made her look almost pleased. Things settled back into routine, or rather, into a new version of routine. Caius kept his morning schedule. North Gallery at 10. Lunch in the smaller dining room. Estate work from 2 until 6 most days. He was still contained and careful in every formal interaction. Still the same controlled lord he had always been in public contexts. But when I brought his morning tea to the North Gallery, he said, "Sit with me for a moment." So I sat. Not every morning. Not when the household demanded otherwise. But often enough that it became a pattern, one of those small private things that exists between people who have decided something about each other. We talked, sometimes, about the estate, about books, about small observations from the day before. Sometimes we did not talk and just sat in the morning light with our separate cups, and the quiet between us was not empty. He showed me the letter on a Thursday, his father's letter, the one he had been carrying for years, the unopened one that had sat in his coat pocket like an unresolved question. He took it out while we were in the gallery and held it for a moment without speaking, looking at it the way you look at something you have been afraid of for so long that the fear has become familiar. I sat beside him and did not say anything. He had not asked for words. Then he said quietly, "I am afraid it will say something I am not ready to hear." "What do you think it says?" I asked. "That he was proud of me." He turned the letter over in his hands. "And that he understood why I was angry at him before he died. And that he forgave me for all the years I spent making it clear I did not forgive him." I looked at the window, at the winter light coming across the grounds. "Those would be hard things to read," I said. "Yes. They would also," I said carefully, "mean that being loved does not have to be the same as being understood perfectly, or the same as a relationship without damage in it. It can be both true that he failed you in some ways and that he loved you. Both at once." He was quiet for a long time. Then he opened the letter. I looked out the window and listened to the estate and waited. The sound of paper. A long silence. Then his breathing, which changed in a small way. After several minutes he said, "He says he was proud of me, and that he understood I was angry, and that he hoped I would find someone who made the anger feel unnecessary." His voice was different, rough at the edges in a way it almost never was. I did not look at him. That moment was his. After a while his hand moved. It came to rest over mine on the window seat between us, warm and deliberate and careful, the way he did everything. His hand over mine. Nothing said. I turned my hand over under his and held it back. We sat like that for a while. Then he said very quietly, "I think I may have found that." I looked at him. He was looking at the window, at the winter estate below, at whatever it was he saw when he looked at the place he had grown up in and that had been both good and hard in equal measure. His face was open, a little rough, entirely real. "Caius," I said. He turned. His silver eyes were warm in the morning light. "I still don't know how long I'll have," I said. "I told you that. I still mean it." "Yes. And you are still." "Yes," he said, simply and completely. "Even if it is not as long as it should be." He looked at me for a long moment, and his grip on my hand was steady and careful, and he said, "I spent years being afraid to read a letter. I am not going to spend more years being afraid of something that may or may not happen." He paused. "And if you do have to go someday, then I will have had this. What is here now?" He looked at our hands. "That is not a small thing." It was not a small thing. I looked at him and at the morning light and at our joined hands on the window seat, and I thought about the novel I had read in another world, about the story I had landed in, the one I was supposed to be invisible in, the one that had been written by someone who had not known what would happen when a background character decided to make tea instead of walking away. Elliot found us. He came to the gallery at noon with extremely unconvincing estate papers in hand, took one look at the scene, the joined hands, the morning light, the specific quality of silence between two people who have recently said something real, and made a sound that was half delight and half relief. "Do not say anything," I told him. "I am not saying anything," he said. He was already smiling. "I am experiencing feelings of quiet satisfaction, which is a different thing entirely." Caius looked at him and said, "For the second time in my experience of this world, he is insufferable." "He is our friend," I said, and the word "our" was warm and strange and exactly right. Elliot pointed at Caius. "You laughed. That was almost a laugh. I heard it." "I did not." "You absolutely did. And I will remember it forever." He tucked the fake estate papers under his arm and turned to leave. "Congratulations to all parties. I am going to go read in the library and be gracious about winning." "You did not win anything," Caius said. "I was extremely patient and eventually correct," Elliot said. "In my experience, that is functionally the same as winning." He waved over his shoulder and left the gallery. Caius looked at me. I looked at him. "He is going to be like this indefinitely," I said. "Yes," he said. He did not look upset about it. "I am aware." We stayed in the North Gallery until the household called us back to the day, and it was quiet and warm, and the winter light came through the windows and fell across the floor in long pale shapes, and I thought about transmigration stories and background characters and the scripts that writers gave to people who deserved more than 4 lines of dialogue. I had come here as Butler Wren. No family name. No future written for me beyond one cup of tea and a quiet disappearance. I had fixed a gate in the rain. I had noticed when someone needed tea and brought it without being asked. I had learned how a difficult, careful man organized his mornings, and I had arranged things so that his mornings were easier. And somewhere in that small and unglamorous process something had happened that no author had written and no story had predicted. That evening I sat in my room. The same thin cot and stone walls and one candle I had woken up to, and I thought about the things I had not understood at the beginning. The story had not been wrong about who Caius Dawnhart was. He was exactly as written, careful and controlled and carrying too much in private. But the story had not known what he would do when someone stopped trying to handle him and just showed up. Just brought tea. Just fixed things. Just stayed. Maybe the script had been wrong about who this story was for. Or maybe there had never been a script at all. Maybe there had only ever been a world, full of people making choices, and a story that became what it became because of those choices. I blew out the candle and lay back and looked at the stone ceiling in the dark. My hand still felt warm where he had held it. I was still here. For now, and perhaps for much longer than that, that was everything.